Chapter 4. The Current Capability of America and Miscellaneous Reflections, 1776. I have never met a person, whether in England or America, who hasn't acknowledged the likelihood of a separation between our countries at some point. We've often made errors in attempting to determine when the continent would be ready for independence. Since everyone agrees on the idea, with differences only in the timing, let's conduct a general assessment to pinpoint that precise moment and dispel any misconceptions. We don't need to search far, because the time is upon us. The unanimous consensus and the harmonious alignment of all factors confirm this fact. Our strength doesn't lie solely in numbers, but in our unity. Nonetheless, our current population is sufficient to repel any external threat. At present, the continent possesses the largest army of well-trained and disciplined men of any power on earth. It has reached the level of strength where no single colony can sustain itself, and only the united effort can achieve success. Anything more or less would be perilous. We already have an adequate land force, and regarding naval matters, we must acknowledge that Britain would never permit the construction of an American warship while they retain control over the continent. Therefore, we won't be any closer to a significant navy a century from now. In fact, we'd be worse off because the country's timber is dwindling daily, and what remains will be distant and hard to obtain. If the continent were densely populated, the current circumstances would be unbearable. The more coastal towns we have, the more we must defend and the more we stand to lose. Our current population is well suited to our needs, leaving no one idle. The decline in trade leads to the growth of an army, and the army's requirements stimulate new trade. We have no debts, and any debts we incur for this cause will serve as a proud testament to our virtue. If we can bequeath posterity a stable form of government and an independent constitution, any price paid will be worthwhile. However, spending millions just to repeal a few unjust acts and overthrow the current ministry is unworthy of the responsibility and cruel to future generations. It leaves them with the monumental task and a debt that offers no benefit. Such a notion is beneath a person of honor and reveals the true mark of a narrow-minded and insignificant politician. The debt we might accumulate is inconsequential if the objective is achieved. No nation should be without debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it doesn't accrue interest, it poses no burden. Britain is burdened with a debt exceeding £140 million sterling, for which they pay over £4 million in interest. In return for their debt, they possess a substantial navy. America, without debt and without a navy, could obtain a navy twice the size of the English national debt for a fraction of the cost. Currently, the English Navy's total worth doesn't surpass £3.5 million sterling. The first and second editions of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which now serve as proof that the previous estimation of the Navy's value is accurate. Please refer to Entick's Naval History, Introduction, page 56. The cost of constructing a ship of various rates and furnishing it with masts, yards, sails, rigging, and 8 months' worth of boatswains' and carpenters' sea stores, as calculated by Mr. Burchett, Secretary to the Navy, is as follows in pounds of sterling. For a ship with 100 guns, £35,553. For a ship with 90 guns, £29,886. For a ship with 80 guns, £23,638. For a ship with 70 guns, £17,785. For a ship with 60 guns, £14,197. For a ship with 50 guns, £10,606. For a ship with 40 guns, £7,558. For a ship with 30 guns, £5,846. For a ship with 20 guns, £3,710. From this data, we can calculate the total value or cost of the entire British Navy in 1757 when it was at its zenith. Ships with 100 guns, 6, totaling £213,318. Ships with 90 guns, 12, totaling 358,632 pounds. Ships with 80 guns, 12, totaling 283,656 pounds. Ships with 70 guns, 43, totaling 764,755 pounds. Ships with 60 guns, 35, totaling 496,895 pounds. Ships with 50 guns, 40, totaling 424,240 pounds. Ships with 40 guns, 45, totaling 340,110 pounds. Ships with 20 guns, 58, totaling 215,180 pounds. Sloops, bombs, and fire ships, averaging 2,000 pounds each, 170,000 pounds in pounds of sterling in total. The overall cost of the British Navy amounts to £3,266,786, with £233,214 remaining for guns. The total cost is approximately £3.5 million. There is no nation on earth better situated or more internally capable of constructing a fleet than America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are all natural resources here, eliminating the need for imports. In contrast, the Dutch, who profit by leasing their warships to the Spaniards and Portuguese, must import most of the materials they require. We should view the construction of a fleet as a form of commerce, as it is the natural industry of this country. It is the best investment we can make. A completed navy is worth more than its cost and represents the harmonious intersection of commerce and protection in national policy. Let us build. If we don't require the ships, we can sell them, thereby replacing our paper currency with tangible gold and silver. When it comes to manning a fleet, people often make mistakes. It is not necessary for 1/4 of the crew to be sailors. The privateer ship, Captain Death, had the most intense battle during the last war, yet it had fewer than 20 sailors on board, even though it had over 200 men in total. A few experienced sailors can easily train a sufficient number of landmen to work on a ship. Therefore, there is no better time to start focusing on maritime affairs than now, while we have timber, blocked fisheries, and unemployed sailors and shipwrights. 40 years ago, New England built warships with 70 to 80 guns. So why can't we do the same now? Shipbuilding is America's greatest source of pride, and over time, we will surpass the rest of the world in this field. The major empires in the East are mostly inland and cannot compete with us. Africa is still in a state of barbarism, and no European power has as much coastline or access to materials as America does. Nature has given America both abundant coastline and resources, while withholding them from other nations. Shouldn't we have a fleet for our safety? We are no longer a small nation like we were 60 years ago. Back then, we could trust our property in the streets and sleep securely without locks or bolts on our doors and windows. But now, things have changed, and our defense methods should improve as our wealth increases. Just 12 months ago, a common pirate could have sailed up the Delaware River and demanded any amount of money from the city of Philadelphia. The same could have happened to other places as well. Even a daring individual with a brig armed with 14 or 16 guns could have robbed the entire continent and taken away $500,000. These circumstances require our attention and highlight the need for naval protection. Some might argue that once we reconcile with Britain, they will protect us. But would it be wise to rely on the power that tried to subdue us for our defense? Conquest can be disguised as friendship, and after a long and brave resistance, we could be deceived into slavery. And if British ships are not allowed in our harbors, how can they protect us? A navy located 3,000 or 4,000 miles away is of little use, especially during sudden emergencies. Therefore, if we must protect ourselves in the future, why not do it ourselves? Why rely on someone else? The English list of warships is long and formidable, but only a small fraction of them are ready for service at any given time, with many not even in existence anymore. Yet their names are still proudly listed, even if only a plank remains from the original ship. And only a fifth of the ships fit for service can be assigned to a single station at a time, as the British Navy is spread thin across the East and West Indies, the Mediterranean, Africa, and other territories they claim. Due to prejudice and inattention, we have developed a false perception of the British Navy and talked as if we would have to face their entire fleet at once. This misconception has been used by disguised Tories to discourage us from building our own navy. But the truth is, if America had just 1/20th of Britain's naval force, we would still have a significant advantage. Since we do not have any foreign territories to defend, our entire force could be concentrated on our own coast. In the long run, we would have a 2-to-1 advantage over those who have to sail 3,000 or 4,000 miles to attack us and then return the same distance to refit and regroup. While Britain has control over our trade with Europe through its fleet, we have an equal amount of control over their trade with the West Indies, as it is located near our continent. If it is not necessary to maintain a constant navy, we could find a way to keep a naval force during peacetime. We could offer premiums to merchants who build and use ships armed with 20, 30, 40, or 50 guns. The premiums would be proportional to the loss of cargo space for the merchants. 50 or 60 of these ships, along with a few guard ships on constant duty, would be enough to maintain a sufficient navy without burdening ourselves with the problem of having a fleet rotting in docks during peacetime, as England does. Combining the strength of commerce and defense is a wise policy because when our power and wealth support each other, we have nothing to fear from external enemies. In almost every aspect of defense, we have an abundance. We have plenty of hemp for cordage. Our iron is superior to that of other countries. Our small arms are equal to any in the world. We can cast cannon at will. We are producing saltpeter and gunpowder every day. Our knowledge is constantly improving. Resolution is our inherent character, and courage has never abandoned us. So, what is it that we lack? Why do we hesitate? We can expect nothing but ruin from Britain. If she is allowed to govern America again, this continent will not be worth living in. Jealousies will always arise, insurrections will constantly occur, and who will go out to suppress them? Who will risk their life to bring their own countrymen under foreign rule? The dispute between Pennsylvania and Connecticut over some unlocated lands demonstrates the insignificance of British government and proves that only continental authority can regulate continental matters. Another reason why the present time is better than any other is that the fewer our numbers are, the more unoccupied land there is. Instead of the king lavishing it on his worthless dependents, it can be used in the future to pay off the current debt and support the government. No nation under heaven has such an advantage as this. The early stage of the colonies, as it is called, is not against independence, but in favor of it. We are numerous enough, and if we were more so, we might be less united. It is worth noting that the more a country is populated, the smaller their armies are. The ancients had much larger military numbers than the moderns, and the reason is clear. With trade being a consequence of population, people become too absorbed in it to pay attention to anything else. Commerce diminishes both patriotism and military defense. History tells us that the bravest achievements were always accomplished in the early days of a nation. With the increase of commerce, England has lost its spirit. The city of London, despite its numbers, tolerates continuous insults with the patience of a coward. The more people have to lose, the less willing they are to take risks. The rich are generally slaves to fear and submit to courtly power with the trembling duplicity of a spaniel. Youth is the time when good habits are formed, both in nations and individuals. It might be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government 50 years from now. The vast variety of interests caused by increased trade and population would create confusion. Colony would be against colony. Each colony, being capable, might scorn the assistance of others. And while the proud and foolish would celebrate their small distinctions, the wise would lament that the union had not been formed earlier. Therefore, the present time is the right time to establish it. The bonds formed in infancy and the friendships formed in misfortune are the most lasting and unchanging. Our current union has both of these qualities. We are young and we have been through hardships. But our unity has withstood our troubles and creates a memorable era for future generations to take pride in. The present time is also that unique time that only happens once in a nation's history, the time of forming itself into a government. Most nations have missed this opportunity and have been forced to accept laws from their conquerors instead of making their own laws. First, they had a king and then a form of government. Whereas, the articles or charter of government should be formed first, and then people delegated to execute them. Let us learn from the mistakes of other nations and seize the present opportunity to begin government in the right way. When William the Conqueror conquered England, he imposed his laws by force. Until we agree to legally and authoritatively occupy the seat of government in America, we will be in danger of having it filled by some fortunate ruffian who may treat us in the same way. Then, where will our freedom be? Where will our property be? As for religion, I believe it is the essential duty of any government to protect all conscientious believers, and I see no other purpose that government has in relation to religion. Let us discard the narrowness of soul and selfishness of principle that the stingy people of all professions are unwilling to let go of, and we will be freed from our fears on that matter. Suspicion is the companion of mean-spirited individuals and the ruin of good society. Personally, I fully and conscientiously believe that it is the will of the Almighty for there to be diversity of religious opinions among us. It provides a larger field for our Christian kindness. If we all thought the same way, our religious inclinations would lack material for examination. And based on this liberal principle, I see the various denominations among us as being like children of the same family, differing only in what is called their Christian names. On page 40, I mentioned the idea of a continental charter, for I only suggest ideas, not plans, and I would like to bring up the topic again here. A charter should be understood as a solemn obligation that the whole enters into, to support the rights of every separate part, whether it be religion, personal freedom, or property. A firm agreement and a fair settlement create long-lasting friendships. In a previous page, I also mentioned the necessity of a large and equal representation, and there is no political matter that deserves more of our attention. A small number of voters, or a small number of representatives, are equally dangerous. But if the number of representatives is not only small, but unequal, the danger is increased. As an example of this, I mention the following. When the Associators' petition was before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania, only 28 members were present. All 8 members from Bucks County voted against it, and if 7 members from Chester had done the same, this whole province would have been governed by only 2 counties. This is a constant danger that it is exposed to. The unwarranted power grab that the House made in their last session to gain authority over the delegates of the province should warn the people how they trust power to others. They put together a set of instructions for the delegates that were nonsensical and would have been embarrassing for a schoolboy. After being approved by only a few people outside, they were passed in the House on behalf of the entire colony. If the whole colony knew how unwillingly the House had taken on necessary public measures, they would not hesitate to think them unworthy of such a trust. Immediate necessity makes many things convenient, but if continued, they can become oppressive. Expedience and right are different things. When the troubles in America required a consultation, there was no method as ready or appropriate at that time as appointing people from the various houses of assembly for that purpose. The wisdom with which they have proceeded has saved this continent from ruin. But since it is likely that we will never be without a Congress, anyone who wants good order must admit that the method for choosing members of that body deserves consideration. And I ask those who study mankind whether representation and election are too much power for one body of men to have? When we are planning for the future, we must remember that virtue is not inherited. We often gain excellent principles from our enemies and are often surprised into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petition of the New York Assembly with contempt because he said that House only had 26 members, which he argued was too small a number to represent the whole. We thank him for his unintentional honesty. Those who want to fully understand the importance of a large and equal representation to a state should read Berg's political disquisitions. In conclusion, no matter how strange it may seem to some or how unwilling they may be to believe it, many strong reasons can be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs as quickly as a clear and decisive declaration of independence. Some of these reasons are, first, it is customary for other powers to mediate and bring about peace when two nations are at war, but as long as America calls itself a subject of Great Britain, no power can offer mediation. Therefore, we may continue to quarrel indefinitely. Second, it is unreasonable to think that France or Spain will assist us if we only plan to use that assistance to repair the relationship between Britain and America, because those powers would suffer as a result. Third, while we claim to be subjects of Britain, we will be seen as rebels in the eyes of foreign nations. It is dangerous for men to be in arms under the name of subjects. We can understand the paradox, but uniting resistance and subjection is too complicated for most people. Fourth, if a manifesto were to be published and sent to foreign courts, explaining the suffering we have endured and the peaceful methods we have tried to seek redress, declaring that we can no longer live happily or safely under the cruel rule of the British court and that we have been forced to sever all ties with them, while also assuring those courts of our peaceful intentions towards them and our desire to trade with them, such a memorial would have a greater impact on this continent than a ship loaded with petitions to Britain. As British subjects, we cannot be received or heard abroad. The customs of all courts are against us and will be until we achieve independence and take our place among other nations. These actions may seem strange and difficult at first, but like the steps we have already taken, they will become familiar and agreeable in time. Until independence is declared, the continent will feel like a person who keeps procrastinating an unpleasant task, knowing it must be done but dreading to start, wishing it was over, and constantly haunted by the thought of its necessity. Chapter 4 Summary. Paine emphasizes the potential and capabilities of the American colonies, highlighting their vast resources and untapped potential for self-governance. He also offers miscellaneous reflections on the urgency of pursuing independence and the path forward for America's future. Appendix. Since the first edition of this pamphlet was published, or rather, on the same day it was released, the King's Speech appeared in this city. If prophecy had guided the timing of this publication, it could not have been more timely or necessary. The violent nature of the speech shows the need to pursue the principles of independence. People read as a form of revenge. And instead of terrifying, the speech paved the way for the courageous principles of independence. Ceremonies, and even silence, for whatever reason they may arise, have a harmful tendency when they give any support to base and wicked actions. Therefore, if we accept this principle, it naturally follows that the King's Speech, being a piece of finished villainy, deserved and still deserves general condemnation from both the Congress and the people. However, since the domestic peace of a nation depends greatly on the purity of what can be called national manners, it is often better to ignore certain things with silent disdain rather than use new methods of disapproval that might introduce any changes to the guardian of our peace and safety. Perhaps it is mainly due to this prudent delicacy that the King's Speech has not been publicly condemned until now. The speech, if it can be called that, is nothing more than a deliberate and audacious defamation against the truth, the common good, and the existence of mankind. It is a formal and pompous way of offering human sacrifices to the pride of tyrants. But this general massacre of mankind is one of the privileges and inevitable consequences of kings. They do not acknowledge nature, and since they are beings we have created, they do not know us and have become the gods of their creators. The speech has one good quality, which is that it is not meant to deceive, and we cannot be deceived by it even if we wanted to. Brutality and tyranny are evident in its words. It leaves us with no doubts, and every line convinces us, even as we read it, that the King of Britain is more savage than the person who hunts in the woods for prey, the naked and untutored Indian. Sir John Dalrymple, the alleged father of a whining and deceitful piece called The Address of the People of England to the Inhabitants of America, has perhaps out of a vain belief that the people here would be frightened by the grandeur and description of a king, given, though very unwisely on his part, the true character of the current king. This writer says, "But if you are inclined to praise an administration, which we do not complain about," referring to the Marquis of Rockingham's administration during the repeal of the Stamp Act, "it is very unfair of you to withhold praise from that prince, whose permission alone allowed them to do anything." This is blatant Toryism. It is idolatry without a disguise. And anyone who can calmly listen to and accept such doctrine has lost their claim to rationality. They have abandoned the dignity of humanity and sunk below the level of animals, crawling contemptibly through the world like worms. However, it matters very little now what the King of England says or does. He has wickedly disregarded every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience under his feet, and through a consistent and arrogant display of insolence and cruelty, earned universal hatred for himself. It is now in America's best interest to take care of herself. She already has a large and young family whom it is her duty to protect, rather than giving away her resources to support a power that has become a disgrace to humanity and Christianity. You, whose duty it is to safeguard the morals of a nation, regardless of your sect or denomination, as well as those who are the guardians of public liberty, if you wish to preserve your native country free from European corruption, you must secretly desire a separation. But leaving the moral aspect to personal reflection, I will focus my further remarks on the following topics. First, it is in America's interest to be separated from Britain. Second, which plan is easier and more feasible, reconciliation or independence? With some occasional comments. In support of the first point, I could, if deemed appropriate, present the opinions of some of the most capable and experienced individuals on this continent, whose views on this matter are not yet publicly known. It is, in fact, a self-evident position. No nation in a state of foreign dependence, limited in its trade, and restricted in its legislative powers, can ever achieve significant prosperity. America has not yet experienced true wealth, and although its progress is unparalleled in the history of other nations, it is still in its infancy compared to what it could achieve if it had the power to legislate for itself, as it should. England is currently coveting something that would not benefit her even if she were to obtain it, and the continent is hesitating on a matter that will ultimately lead to its ruin if ignored. It is America's trade with Britain, not its conquest, that benefits England, and that trade would largely continue even if the countries were as independent of each other as France and Spain, because in many areas, neither can find a better market. But it is the independence of this country from Britain or any other power that is now the main and only objective worth fighting for, and like all other truths discovered out of necessity, it will become clearer and stronger every day. First, because it will inevitably happen sooner or later. Second, because the longer it is delayed, the more difficult it will be to achieve. I have often amused myself, both in public and private settings, by silently observing the false arguments of those who speak without reflecting. Among the many I have heard, the following seems to be the most common. If this rupture had happened 40 or 50 years from now instead of now, the continent would have been more capable of shaking off dependence. But I argue that our military ability at this time comes from the experience gained in the last war, and in 40 or 50 years, that experience would have been completely lost. By then, the continent would not have had any generals or military officers left, and we, or those who come after us, would be as ignorant of martial matters as the ancient Indians. This single point proves that the present time is preferable to all others. Now, moving on to another point, if we were to patch things up with Britain and allow them to remain the governing and sovereign power of America, which, given the current circumstances, would be giving up completely, we would deprive ourselves of the means to pay off the debt we have or may incur. The value of the backlands that some provinces have been unfairly deprived of, due to the unjust extension of Canada's borders, is estimated to be over £25 million in Pennsylvania currency. The annual quit rents, valued at 1 penny per acre, would amount to £2 million. By selling these lands, we can pay off the debt without burdening anyone, and the quit rents collected can support the government's expenses. It doesn't matter how long it takes to pay off the debt, as long as the lands are sold for that purpose. The Congress, at that time, will act as the Continental trustees for the execution of this plan. Now, let's discuss the second point. Which plan is easier and more practical, reconciliation or independence? I answer, based on the guidance of nature, that independence is a straightforward path contained within ourselves, while reconciliation is a complicated and confusing matter that involves a treacherous and unpredictable court. The answer is clear. The current state of America is truly alarming for anyone capable of reflection. We are without law, without government, and without any power except what is granted by courtesy. We are held together by a rare unity of sentiment, which is, however, subject to change and under attack by secret enemies. Our current condition is one of legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, and a constitution without a name. And, astonishingly, we fight for independence while still seeking dependence. This situation is unprecedented, and no one can predict the outcome. No one's property is secure in the current unstructured system. The minds of the people are left to wander, pursuing whatever fancies or opinions arise. Nothing is considered criminal, and there is no such thing as treason. Everyone believes they are free to act as they please. The Tories would not have dared to assemble offensively if they knew their lives would be forfeited to the state's laws. A distinction should be made between English soldiers captured in battle and American inhabitants who take up arms. The former are prisoners, but the latter are traitors. One forfeits their liberty, the other their life. Despite our wisdom, there is a visible weakness in some of our actions that encourages dissension. The continental belt is too loosely fastened. If we don't take action soon, it will be too late, and we will enter a state where neither reconciliation nor independence is possible. The king and his loyal followers are once again trying to divide the continent, and there are printers among us who spread deceptive lies. The artful and hypocritical letter that appeared in several New York papers a few months ago is evidence that there are men lacking either judgment or honesty. It is easy for them to talk of reconciliation from their hiding places, but do they truly understand the difficulty and danger that would arise if the continent were divided on this issue? Do they consider the various orders of men whose situations and circumstances must be taken into account? Do they put themselves in the shoes of those who have already lost everything and the soldiers who have given up everything to defend their country? If their misguided moderation only considers their own private situations, ignoring others, they will soon realize that they are underestimating the consequences. Some say we should return to the conditions of 1763. But I ask, even if Britain had the power to comply with that request, which they don't, and even if they proposed it, how can we trust such a corrupt and untrustworthy court to keep its promises? Another parliament, or even the current one, could repeal the agreement in the future, claiming it was obtained through violence or granted unwisely. And in that case, where is our recourse? We can't sue nations in court. Canons are the lawyers of kings, and the sword, not justice, but war, decides the outcome. To be at the age of 63, it is not enough for the laws to be in the same state, but our circumstances must also be in the same state. Our towns that were burned and destroyed need to be repaired or rebuilt. We need to make up for our private losses and pay off our public debts that were incurred for defense. Otherwise, we will be millions of dollars worse off than we were at that time. If this request had been met a year ago, it would have greatly pleased the people of the continent. However, now it is too late, the Rubicon is passed. Furthermore, taking up arms solely to repeal a financial law seems as unjustifiable according to divine law and as contrary to human feelings as taking up arms to enforce obedience to it. The end does not justify the means, as human lives are too valuable to be wasted on such trivial matters. It is the violence done and threatened to our persons, the destruction of our property by an armed force, and the invasion of our country by fire and sword that justifies the use of arms. The moment when such a mode of defense became necessary, all allegiance to Britain should have ceased, and the independence of America should have been considered as starting from and proclaimed by the first gunshot fired against her. This line represents consistency, not driven by whim or ambition, but brought about by a series of events for which the colonies were not responsible. I will conclude these remarks with the following timely and well-intentioned suggestions. We should reflect that there are 3 different ways through which independence may be achieved in the future, and one of these 3 will eventually be the fate of America. It can be achieved through the legal voice of the people in Congress, through military power, or through a mob. It may not always be the case that our soldiers are citizens and the masses are reasonable people. Virtue, as I have already mentioned, is not inherited nor everlasting. If independence is achieved through the first means, we have every opportunity and encouragement to create the noblest and purest constitution on earth. We have the power to start the world anew. A situation like the present has not occurred since the days of Noah until now. The birth of a new world is imminent, and a population perhaps as large as that of Europe is about to receive their share of freedom within a few months. The reflection is profound, and in this perspective, the petty objections of a few weak or self-interested men appear trivial and ridiculous when compared to the affairs of the entire world. If we neglect this favorable and inviting period and independence is achieved through other means in the future, we must blame ourselves or those whose narrow and biased minds habitually opposed the measure without inquiry or reflection. There are reasons to support independence that should be privately considered rather than publicly disclosed. We should not be debating whether we should be independent or not at this point, but rather be eager to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable basis, and be restless that it has not yet begun. Every day convinces us of its necessity. Even the Tories, if any still exist among us, should be the most concerned to promote it. Just as the appointment of committees initially protected them from popular anger, a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of ensuring their continued security. Therefore, if they lack the virtue to be Whigs, they should at least have the prudence to desire independence. In short, independence is the only bond that can unite and keep us together. We will then see our objective clearly, and we will refuse to listen to the schemes of an intriguing and cruel enemy based on legal grounds. We will also be in a suitable position to negotiate with Britain, as it is reasonable to assume that the pride of the British court will be less hurt by negotiating with the American states for terms of peace than with those whom they call rebellious subjects for terms of reconciliation. It is our delay that gives them hope for conquest, and our reluctance only prolongs the war. Since we have withheld our trade without any positive result in order to seek redress for our grievances, let us now try the alternative by independently addressing them ourselves and then offering to resume trade. The merchants and reasonable individuals in England will still be on our side because peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer is not accepted, we can approach other countries for assistance. I rest my case on these grounds. And since no counteroffer has been made to refute the arguments in the previous editions of this pamphlet, it is evidence that either the arguments cannot be refuted or that the party in favor of them is too numerous to be opposed. Therefore, instead of looking at each other with suspicion or doubt, let us extend the hand of friendship to our neighbors and unite in drawing a line that, like an act of forgiveness, will bury every past disagreement in oblivion. Let the names of Whig and Tory become extinct, and let us only hear the names of good citizens, open and determined friends, and virtuous supporters of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. To the representatives of the religious society of the people called Quakers, or to as many of them as were involved in publishing the recent piece titled The Ancient Testimony and Principles of the People Called Quakers Renewed, with respect to the King and government, and touching the commotions now prevailing in these and other parts of America addressed to the people in general. The author of this letter is one of the few who never dishonors religion by ridiculing or arguing against any denomination. All individuals are accountable to God, not to man, when it comes to matters of religion. Therefore, this letter is not specifically addressed to you as a religious group, but rather as a political body involving yourselves in matters that your professed principles of peace instruct you not to meddle with. You have placed yourselves in the position of representing the entire body of Quakers without proper authority to do so. In order to be on equal footing with you, the writer of this letter, representing those who approve the writings and principles against which your testimony is directed, has chosen this unique situation. This is done to highlight the presumption of character that you cannot see in yourselves. Neither the writer nor you have any claim or title to political representation. When people deviate from the right path, it is not surprising that they stumble and fall. It is evident from the way you have managed your testimony that politics, as a religious group, is not your proper domain. Although it may seem well suited to you, it is actually a mixture of good and bad put together unwisely, with an unnatural and unjust conclusion. We acknowledge and credit you for the first 2 pages, the entire piece being less than 4 pages, and expect the same courtesy from you. The love and desire for peace is not limited to Quakerism, it is a natural and religious wish shared by all denominations. On this basis, as individuals striving to establish an independent constitution of our own, we surpass all others in our hope, purpose, and aim. Our plan is everlasting peace. We are tired of the conflict with Britain and see no real resolution other than a final separation. Our actions are consistent because we bear the burdens and suffer the evils of the present day for the sake of introducing an endless and uninterrupted peace. We are striving, and will continue to strive, to separate and dissolve a connection that has already filled our land with blood. As long as the name of this connection remains, it will be the cause of future harm to both countries. We do not fight for revenge or conquest, nor do we act out of pride or passion. We are not flaunting our fleets and armies to the world or plundering the globe. We are attacked under the shade of our own vines, in our own homes, and on our own lands. We perceive our enemies as highwaymen and housebreakers. Since we have no defense in civil law, we are compelled to punish them through military means. We apply the sword in the same cases where you have previously applied the noose. Perhaps we feel a level of compassion for the ruined and insulted victims throughout the continent that has not yet reached some of your hearts. But do not mistake the cause and basis of your testimony. Do not confuse coldness of soul with religion or replace the true Christian with a bigot. Oh, you partial ministers of your own acknowledged principles! If bearing arms is sinful, then the initial act of going to war must be even more sinful, considering the difference between a deliberate attack and unavoidable defense. Therefore, if you genuinely preach from conscience and do not intend to turn your religion into a political tool, prove it to the world by proclaiming your doctrine to our enemies, as they too bear arms. Demonstrate your sincerity by publishing it at St. James's, to the commanders-in-chief at Boston, to the admirals and captains who are piratically ravaging our coasts, and to all the murdering miscreants who are acting in authority under the one whom you claim to serve. If you possessed the honest soul of Berkeley, you would preach repentance to your king. You would confront the royal wrongdoer with his sins and warn him of eternal damnation. You would not direct your biased invectives solely against the injured and insulted, but as faithful ministers, you would cry out and spare none. Do not claim to be persecuted, and do not try to make us the authors of the reproach that you are bringing upon yourselves. We testify to all people that we do not complain against you because you are Quakers, but because you pretend to be Quakers when you are not. Oh no! It seems like you believe that all sin is reduced to the act of bearing arms, and that only the people are guilty of it. To us, it appears that you have confused party loyalty with conscience because your actions lack consistency. It is very hard for us to believe many of your supposed objections because we see the same men who denounce worldly wealth actively pursuing it with determination. The quote you used from Proverbs, stating that when a man's ways please the Lord, he mocketh even his enemies to be at peace with him, is a poor choice on your part. It implies that the ways of the king, whom you wish to support, do not please the Lord, otherwise his reign would be peaceful. Now, let's move on to the second part of your testimony, which seems to be the main point. You claim that it has always been your belief that setting up and removing kings and governments is God's prerogative, for reasons known only to him. You state that it is not your place to be involved in such matters, or to plot against or overthrow any government. Instead, you should pray for the king, the safety of the nation, and the well-being of all people. you believe that you should live a peaceful and honest life under the government that God has chosen for you. If these are truly your principles, why don't you adhere to them? Why don't you leave what you call God's work to Him? These principles actually teach you to patiently and humbly wait for the outcome of public affairs and accept it as God's will. So, what is the purpose of your political testimony if you truly believe in what it says? By publishing it, you either show that you don't truly believe what you profess or that you lack the virtue to practice what you believe. The principles of Quakerism should make a person a peaceful and law-abiding subject under any government. If setting up and removing kings and governments is God's prerogative, then He will not be robbed of it by us. Therefore, these principles lead you to approve of everything that has happened or will happen to kings, as it is all part of God's work. Oliver Cromwell thanks you. Charles did not die by the hands of man, and if the current proud imitator of him were to meet the same fate, according to the doctrine in your testimony, you would be obligated to applaud it. Kings are not removed by miracles, and changes in governments are not brought about by anything other than common human actions, just like the ones we are taking now. Even the dispersion of the Jews, though foretold by Jesus, was achieved through the use of arms. Therefore, if you refuse to be involved on one side, you should not meddle on the other. Instead, you should wait in silence for the outcome. Unless you can provide divine authority to prove that the Almighty, who created and placed this new world far away from the corrupt court of Britain, disapproves of its independence, how can you, based on your principles, justify inciting people to reject any writings or actions that show a desire to break away from Britain and our rightful subordination to the king and those in authority under him? This is a contradiction. In the previous paragraph, you passively surrendered the power to govern and change kings and governments to God, but now you are going back on your principles and wanting to be involved. Is it possible that the conclusion you quoted here can logically follow from the doctrine you laid down? The inconsistency is too obvious to ignore, the absurdity too great not to be laughed at. It can only be made by those whose understanding is clouded by the narrow and bitter spirit of a desperate political party. It's important to note that you are not representative of the entire Quaker community, but rather a factional and fractional part of it. This concludes the examination of your testimony. I do not ask anyone to abhor it as you have done, but only to read it and judge it fairly. I would like to add the following remark. The setting up and putting down of kings undoubtedly refers to making someone a king who is not yet one and removing someone from kingship who is already a king. And what does this have to do with the current situation? We have no intention of setting up or removing kings, making or unmaking them. We simply want nothing to do with them. Therefore, your testimony, no matter how it is viewed, only serves to discredit your judgment. For many reasons, it would have been better off left unpublished. First, because it leads to the decline and discredit of all religion, and is extremely dangerous to society, to involve it in political disputes. Secondly, because it presents a group of individuals, many of whom deny any involvement or approval of publishing political testimonies. Thirdly, because it has the potential to undo the continental harmony and friendship that you have helped establish through your recent generous and charitable donations, which is of great importance to all of us. And now, without anger or resentment, I bid you farewell. I sincerely hope that as men and Christians, you will always fully and uninterruptedly enjoy every civil and religious right, and that you will, in turn, work towards securing these rights for others. However, I hope that the example you have unwisely set, of mixing religion with politics, will be disavowed and condemned by every inhabitant of America. Finis. Appendix Summary. Common sense provides additional arguments and insights into Paine's beliefs about the need for American independence, the flaws of monarchy, and the principles of self-governance and democracy. It reinforces the core message of the main pamphlet, advocating for the separation of America from British rule and the establishment of a government that reflects the will of the people. Peer review of Common Sense. No writer has exceeded Paine in ease and familiarity of style, in perspicuity of expression, happiness of elucidation, and in simple and unassuming language. Thomas Jefferson. A pamphlet called Common Sense makes a great noise. One of the vilest things that ever was published to the world. Full of false representations, lies, calumny, and treason, whose principles are to subvert all kingly governments and erect an independent republic. Nicholas Creswell. I dreaded the effect so popular a pamphlet might have among the people, and determined to do all in my power to counteract the effect of it. John Adams. Its effects were sudden and extensive upon the American mind. It was read by public men. Dr. Benjamin Rush. Have you read the pamphlet Common Sense? I never saw such a masterful performance. In short, I own myself convinced, by the arguments, of the necessity of separation. General Charles Lee. Translation process and AI acknowledgments. In the realm of literary alchemy, where the past meets the present to forge a bridge across epochs, is the facilitator, Sir Adam S. Barnett, a retired American Army officer. He embarked on a quest to breathe new life into the treasures of antiquity, notably the profound wisdom contained within philosophy and Old English texts. With astute ingenuity, Sir Adam conceived a program, a marvel of modernity, that possessed the power to disassemble old texts into manageable fragments. With a mastery akin to that of a watchmaker, he carefully composed sets of instructions, each imbued with the essence of linguistic harmony, to guide none other than ChatGPT 3.5, a digital savant of language evolution. Under Sir Adam's vigilant stewardship, ChatGPT 3.5 embarked on a Herculean task, translating the Old English into the vibrant, accessible lexicon of the present day. The AI, unburdened by the limitations of time, worked tirelessly to capture the brilliance of the original authors while bringing their wisdom into the luminous glow of contemporary understanding. Yet, the task did not conclude with mere translation. Sir Adam, with his keen eye and profound reverence for the literary past, assumed the role of a literary sculptor. With careful hands, he edited the translations, chiseling away the anachronisms and refining the prose to resonate with the sensibilities of modern readers. In the end, the collaboration between Sir Adam S. Barnett and his program used the diligent power of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT 3.5, to become a harmonious symphony, uniting epochs, transcending linguistic boundaries, and bestowing upon the world a precious gift, the timeless wisdom of old, brilliantly reimagined for the boundless future. Changes and other notes. The facilitator undertook the task of modernizing chapter titles and appended concise summaries at the conclusion of every chapter. Thomas Paine's Common Sense had a staggering total of 13,762 revisions were meticulously crafted from the original text to render it accessible and engaging for the discerning contemporary reader.